You know how many World Series records number 7 Mickey Mantle holds? Think about it. Tonight on Guys Radio, we're going to host Tony Castro, baseball historian and author of a trilogy about Mickey Mantle, considered the greatest baseball player of all time. Or was he? We're going to chop that up tonight with Tony on Guys Radio here in Southern California on KCAA Radio, 102.3 106.5 FM, 1050 AM at 8 p.m. Pacific Time. The podcast drops tomorrow worldwide. Tony Castro with Robert Manni, your guy on Guys Radio. The answer to the question, how many World Series records does number 7 Mickey Mantle hold? 7. See you tonight.
It's Guy Radio. Here's your host, Robert Manni.
Welcome to Guys Radio. This is your host, Robert Manni, welcoming you to a show where men and women can be at their best and everyone wins. Guys Radio. We've got a very special show for you today. Our special guest, he'll be coming on shortly, is Tony Castro. He's a really wonderful man and a great writer, and he's written 3 books about Mickey Mantle, who's a mythical, heroic, Homeric type of character that's been part of our lives, particularly if you're a baby boomer. Everybody's heard of Mickey Mantle, and if you're a young kid growing up in New Jersey and New York in the 60s and 70s and 50s, you knew about Mickey Mantle. I remember the first time my mom and I were watching a Yankees game. I had watched, but I was home with my mom one time back in River Edge, New Jersey, and I remember my mom was ironing, and we started watching a Yankees game in the afternoon. And then it became 6 o'clock. And then it became 7 o'clock. And it just kept going. And we watched an entire 27-inning game together. And my mom became a lifelong Yankee fan from that moment on. She watched almost every game that she could. And I continued to watch, and I'm still a huge Yankees fan. Unfortunately, as we know, the season is delayed. And I want to touch base a little bit about that right now because this coronavirus is out there. And just a couple of thoughts. I'm no expert. What I'm doing is my family and I, obviously, we're staying home. We're staying in. We go for a walk every day down here in San Diego. We take a walk along the waterfront. If we need some supplies, we'll stop into the supermarket and then we come back. What do we make of all of this? Well, I think that it's not going to stay like this forever. This is as of mid-March. This is just starting to ramp up in terms of everybody kind of getting into the lockdown here, and we don't know what the numbers are going to be with the virus, so we don't know what's coming up ahead. But eventually it'll go away. Eventually it'll wane, and eventually we'll get back to, I'm not going to say business as usual, but maybe business a little bit changed, but we'll be doing business because one of the things that makes this country run is business. And after 3 weeks or so, I think everything's going to be reassessed because people live paycheck to paycheck. People don't have money. Yeah, they're going to send out $1,000 possibly to everybody, but how long is that going to last? Withholding a payroll tax for people, that's going to help the people who are working. But how about the people who work for tips or aren't working, the people who really need the money? So hopefully we'll be reassessing things in a couple of weeks, and maybe things will open up by then, depending on where the numbers are. I think what happened is the pandemic, if you will, was kind of downplayed and diminished back in January, February, when we could have kind of gotten ahead of it. I'm not going to point any fingers. I think it's pretty obvious what went on. And then all of a sudden we're playing catch up and everything gets locked down over 3 days. Everything's shut up. You can't use your amenities in your buildings. You can't have move-ins and move-outs. Nobody can go to work. There's no court cases. The mail is still being delivered as of today, but this is serious stuff, and it's something that none of us have ever gone through, and we're watching other countries around the world to see what we can learn from the trajectory of this virus, and if people are getting better, how fast, How many people are dying from this? Is it people of all ages? I think I just read somebody in New York, an attorney there, 45 years old, healthy. Within 3 days, he's on he's on an oxygen thing because of the fibrosis effect of this disease. It's not like a typical pneumonia. Pneumonia, you get phlegm, and it's a wet cough. This is dry, and your kind of lungs start to dry up, if you will, and you can't breathe. And it happens pretty quickly. So we've all got to check in on our loved ones and make sure that people have what they need. I do want to wag a finger a little bit at these people who've gone out and bought up all the toilet paper, which is absurd, number one, and it's greedy, number two. And I blame individuals for just taking all the supplies off the shelves. And I also blame these retailers for not enforcing a specific amount that you're allowed to buy early on. I saw signs go up, you can only buy 2 or 3 packages. That was too late. The shelves were bare. And now every day the shelves are bare for toilet paper. And this is ridiculous because this virus has nothing to do with going to the bathroom. It's not about diarrhea or whatever. God forbid it was. We'd have a real problem. But people, share the toilet paper. Don't hoard the toilet paper. If you don't need it, don't buy it. Other people may not have had the opportunity to get some. Maybe some elderly people couldn't go out to the store. They couldn't muscle their way in line and get to the shelves before you did with your 5 different packages of toilet paper. So let's get a grip on things. Other thing is, make sure you have some food at home. Make sure you have your water. Listen to some podcasts. Read some books. Reassess your life, what you could be doing better, what you're learning from all of this. You can work out at home. You can go out for a walk. You can go out for a run. Nobody's stopping us from doing that yet. But you want to stay safe, and you don't want to be touching everything. You want to be taking care of your kids. You want to be schooling your kids if they're home. You just want to be smart about this stuff, and you want to be kind, and you want to check in on people who need help. So that's my little soapbox speech on this. Be considerate. Be a guy's guy when it comes to this coronavirus, and be kind, considerate, and look out for other people. And they're telling you don't go out and party in the bars or the restaurants. Not that we can anymore, but listen, you have all these spring breakers having a big party at the beach. Who knows what's going to happen with those people when they come back? Are they going to infect everybody else? I don't know. But let's be smart and let's be considerate. So that's my whole thing about the coronavirus. I want to get this out there now. Again, I'm no expert. I'm just like you. I'm doing my thing. But let's be considerate to other people. So Guys Radio, your host, Robert Manni. We're going to be back in a moment with our special guest, Tony Castro.
It's Guy Radio.
Guys Radio, your host, Robert Manni. As mentioned, I have a very special guest today on the show. I'm a huge Yankees fan. I know I moved to the West Coast recently, but I've been a Yankees fan since I used to go to Old Timers Day with my parents. They used to take me, and we saw players like Moose Scarron and Elston Howard and Yogi Berra and, of course, Mickey Mantle. And that's who we're going to talk about today. Mantle, the best there ever was. We've got the author, Tony Castro. He is a really special writer. He's an American historian and a Nieman Fellow at Harvard. He's author of 7 books, big books too, including the literary biography Looking for Hemingway and landmark civil rights history that hopefully you all know about, Chicano Power, which has been hailed as brilliant. Mantle, the best there ever was, completes Castro's Mickey Mantle Trilogy, which includes Mickey Mantle, America's Prodigal Son, DiMag and Mick, Sibling Rivals, Yankee Blood Brothers, and this one, which is called Mantle, the Best There Ever Was. Tony Castro, welcome to Guys Radio. I'm so thrilled to have you here. Thanks for being on the show.
Thanks for having me.
Well, let's start right at the beginning. Obviously, you're a huge fan of Mickey Mantle. What inspired you to write 3 complete books out of your 7 books? 3 of them are about Mickey Mantle. He must have had a huge impact on your life. I know he's a Homeric type of figure for all of us who were baby boomers, but what has he meant to you?
Probably the same thing he has meant to so many Mantle fans. And I didn't set out to write a trilogy or even 2 books about Mantle. around the time of his death, I was in Dallas, attended the services, and then returned to Los Angeles and tried to figure out how to explain Mickey Mantle to my sons, who were very young at that time. And I realized then that the biographies that I had grown up with about Mantle were outdated and in some instances not very good. So I happened to have an agent who had a connection to the Mantle family. It was Mike Hamelberg, and Mitchell Hamelberg, Mike's father, had actually been the producer of a film called Safe at Home, which came out in 1962. It was a kid's comedy with Mantle and Roger Maris taking advantage of their 1961 home run chase of Babe Ruth's record. And the book had come out and is a classic in terms of just baseball movies especially for Yankees. And so Mike, Mitchell's son, and I talked about this, and I was explaining to him the research that I had done just in trying to explain it to my kids. And we decided to try to do a book. So this was, Mantle, of course, died in 1995. Started playing with the book idea shortly after that, and the book was published in 2002. That was Mickey Mantle, America's Prodigal Son. It was a book that had, Mike said, write as much as you want to on it, and I wrote a 2,000-word book, manuscript. And of course, that's awfully long for a baseball book. I think it was winnowed down to about 400 words, and about 350 pages. I think the size of the book. And I have tremendous amount of material that wasn't used into that. I had no idea of what I was going to do with it. And then a couple of things happened subsequent to that led to the DiMag and Mick book. It came out in 2016. And then, of course, this book, Mantle, the Best There Ever Was, which came out last year. So it wasn't, to answer your question, it wasn't my intention to do a trilogy on Mantle. It just so happened that that's the way it broke down. And I was able to use a lot of the material that hadn't been used in the first book, plus new material that came along that helped produce this last book.
Well, I guess there's so much to Mantle that transcends being just a ball player, as you know, and you are sharing with your family, in that he was a character who came to us after World War II. He took after DiMaggio and the Yankee center field lineage. He was a tragic hero in a way, in that he was so super talented, yet he got injured in his rookie year. And what was amazing is that, as you describe in the book, he was actually trying to help out Joe DiMaggio by running in to get a fly, and DiMaggio waved him off, and he got his spike caught and drained, and that ripped up his knee. And of course, the medical field wasn't as adept as they were now in terms of fixing that, and it really impacted the rest of his career. So beyond that, talk to us, Tony, about what was the myth, what's the mythology around Mickey Mantle beyond what I said. I hope I didn't preclude any of that stuff.
No, I mean, the mythology around baseball and about baseball players goes back to the start of the modern era, or even before the modern era, the days of Ty Cobb, the Gehrig, and the Babe. And mythology is as crucial to baseball as statistics. And so the mythology that arose around Mickey Mantle, like most myths, was not real. I mean, we create these myths, we create these mortal gods to help us get through life, to help us understand situations, not just in politics, but in the whole field of entertainment and politics and whatever else. I mean, the idea of George Washington and some of the mythology that grew up around George Washington or Abraham Lincoln, all of these things were created by their societies to deal with that particular individual, especially when the individual isn't that well known. And at that time, in the early 50s, in 1951, when Mantle was a rookie, we didn't have what we have today, not only the 24-hour news cycle, but blogs,
social
ESPN.
media.
None of that was available. The discussions that went on in terms of baseball were among people themselves, at the ballparks, at bars, among families, among friends. at the water cooler. This was, in fact, these kinds of discussions were what created the whole term water cooler discussion, what went on the next morning after the previous night's game or games or whatever else had happened the night before. So there was this tremendous mythology. To give you one example was the relationship between DiMaggio and Mantle. And as I dug more into into that relationship for that first book, a lot of things came out, and it wasn't the way it was created by the news media at that time, which seemed to cast DiMaggio against Mantle. You know, the good guy against the bad guy, the old unsentimental pro DiMaggio in 51, you know, playing his last year, and the blonde-haired, blue-eyed young rookie straight out of Oklahoma. DiMaggio, the guy who sports writers had a difficult time approaching DiMaggio. DiMaggio was not forthcoming with comments, with talk or whatever. And Mantle, early in his career, he was a shy kid, but he wasn't the Mickey Mantle, the slurry worded Mickey Mantle of later years with the media. In that first year, 1951, with Casey Stengel especially creating this myth about Mantle being the next Ruth, being the next DiMaggio, being potentially better than those. It created this myth that arose about Mantle, that he was going to be the person around whom baseball would center its conversations for the future. Of course, he wasn't. No player could ever be. But that was part of it. And so the DiMaggio-Mantle mythology, the creation of this feud, which didn't really exist, not the way it's been written about and done in things like 61, the Billy Crystal movie of 2001, I guess it was. These things weren't real. It was like Hollywood's creation of whatever it chooses to do, and fitting in generally, you know, all fitting into the one-liner, you know, this is loosely based on a true story.
You had access to Mickey Mantle personally, which is amazing, as well as his wife. And you know, and you tell a great story about how you met him the first time, and you were nervous, and you meet him at a bar, and he's like playing with the peanuts and stuff, and as he keeps drinking beers, he keeps the empty glasses on the table, and it became a discussion that you had to work into some type of article. Tell us about what your personal take was on Mickey Mantle, the human being.
I was a young reporter in Dallas in 1970. I was like 21, 22, having graduated from Baylor. In the big city, I'm reporting on, general assignments, what a young reporter does. And I knew that Mantle lived there. He was a year and a half or so out of retirement. He had retired in 68. And I thought he would be a hard person to get to. I didn't think there'd be any interest. There wasn't, because Mantle had pretty much worn out his welcome in Dallas by this period of time, by 1970. When I mentioned the surliness that he had with reporters, you know, he cussing them out, being unfriendly, being rude to them. A lot of this because of his drinking that was happening a lot of times. But anyway, in 1970, I wanted to meet Mantle. I wanted to see about doing a story on him. And I called several times, finally got a hold of him. He was as rude to me as he was to any other reporter, I guess, at that time, and finally agreed to meet me at this little restaurant in the Turtle Creek area of Dallas. And he agreed to meet me because of golf. I told him I wanted to do a piece for Golf Magazine about Mickey Mantle's golf game. Mantle was the consummate golfer. He was a guy who, Yogi Berra has once said that if Mantle hadn't been a baseball player, he probably would have loved to have been a professional golfer. Mantle wasn't the great golfer that some of his fans made him out to be, but he wasn't a bad golfer. And what made him stand out was his driving ability. He could drive a golf ball as far as he could hit a baseball further.
Wow.
Even.
And you golfed with him, Tony, right?
I did. That first interview didn't go off, the first meeting didn't go off well. I go into the book, I go into how that happened. He happened to be a big drinker. He was already drunk when he showed up at the restaurant. I happened to be the son of a man who was a big drinker. My dad, after World War II, coming back from Europe, got into the bottle quite heavily. A lot of men did. My 2 or 3 uncles that I grew up around were the same way. And some of the times they were happy drunks. A lot of the times they were unhappy, angry drunks. And I grew up around this, and after a while you realize there's a particular way of handling drunks. It's probably easier for a young guy than it is for their daughters, from everything I've learned in discussions with people in the same kind of backgrounds. And so I knew how to handle, or felt I knew how to handle Mantle's drunkenness. You know, you deal with them like a big top, let them spin out of control, and then you do whatever you can, you know, trying to direct them in what way. And it accounted for the fact that Mantle didn't have many friends. In the 25 some odd years that he lived in Houston after his retirement, the number of friends that he had in Houston and Dallas, he had very few friends there, very few close friends, in part because he had a difficult time dealing with people, dealing with other men outside of a baseball situation, and also because a lot of people respect people's privacy. And so, you know, they'd see Mantle at a restaurant. A lot of them left him alone, let's say. Many of them approached him asking for an autograph, and that's when sometimes if you got the bad Mickey Mantle, it just went downhill for, as far as your opinion of him from that, because he could be quite rude. Mm-hmm. So when I say, you know, I befriended Mantle, it was under those circumstances, knowing that what you're really dealing with is someone who has a difficult time getting golf partners. I played at his golf club, Preston Trail, there in Dallas on Preston Road, North Preston Road, mainly because I was living in that area at that time, and I was not a bad golfer, and I was working at an afternoon newspaper, which meant you got in there like at 5:30, 6 o'clock in the morning, and by 1 or 2 in the afternoon you could leave and still get in, especially in the spring and the summer, Texas weather, get in a full 18 holes.
So did you have many experiences and contact with Mantle when he was sober? And if so, what type of person was he beneath all of that? Because, you know, by the time you had met him, he was already pretty much in, you know, he had an issue with alcohol, let's face it.
He had an issue with alcohol, and it began about 11 o'clock every morning. Mm-hmm. He had this, everybody knows the stories about his favorite drink in the days of that period. And it was a play on Wheaties, the Breakfast of Champions. Mm-hmm. He had a drink that he varied from time to time and place to place, but he called it the Breakfast of Champions. Wow. And he would have one of these at 10:30, 11 o'clock in the morning, and he would have 2 more, and by noon, by 1 o'clock, he was well into being drunk, and oftentimes played golf this way. I mean, you know, there are a number of people who over the years have gone about their lives being
functioning alcoholics.
Yeah, functioning alcoholics. Exactly.
Mm-hmm. Let's pivot a little bit, because you were very honest in how you handled his. You know, the book is not putting Mantle up on a pedestal. You portray him as a human being, as a man, with his positive aspects and his flaws. Let's talk about his physical tools, because, again, the name of the book is Mantle, the Best There Ever Was. Our special guest on Guys Radio, Tony Castro. So as best, you make the argument, and I think it's very compelling, as he's the best there ever was. I think with a caveat, correct me if I'm wrong, Tony, that's if he did not get injured his rookie season, which really put a damper on his career, because he had to deal with his knee issues. But he had all the tools. He had the speed. He had the power. He was a switch hitter. He started as an infielder. He went out to center field, and he hit mammoth home runs and drove in runs, and he was super clutch. So take it from me from there, Tony.
Well, 1957, this will get us into it in a very unusual way. Most Mantle fans, and especially if you grew up at that time, in 1957, most Mantle fans were disappointed with that season because it followed the great 1956 season, the Triple Crown season. And 1957, Mantle had a very good year by most standards at that time. He hit a little over 300. He didn't hit anywhere close to the home runs he'd hit the year before. And he hit his highest batting average, but he was beaten out in the batting race by Ted Williams, of all people. And so a lot of people, I remember at that time, it was like, oh, God, maybe next year, especially since in 57 the Yankees didn't win the World Series. And it wasn't until most recently that, in the era of sabermetrics and the new analytics of looking at baseball, that baseball nerds have uncovered this whole notion that 1957 was actually one of the greatest seasons produced by any baseball player, by any hitter. In fact, if you look at it and compare it using the modern day analytics, looking at ball players' WAR, especially the wins above replacement, you see that 1956 and 1957 are the two greatest seasons for any baseball player, other than Babe Ruth and two of his greatest seasons. And so you start from there and you think, oh my God, 57. That was the year most of us had written off, up until you start looking at what the nerds have produced, these statistics that look at baseball in an entirely different way. Because, as you know, growing up as a baby boomer, in our era, the only way anyone ever looked at baseball players, especially hitters, was the three major categories.
Right.
Batting average, home runs, RBIs. I mean, that's where the whole idea of the Triple Crown came into.
How would you compare Mantle with, Ted Williams, let's say? I'll throw a couple names at you, because when people have the arguments about who's the greatest ever, you hear Willie Mays, you hear Ted Williams, you hear Mickey Mantle, you hear Babe Ruth, you hear DiMaggio. Let me start with the one that when I would have the argument with people about it, they'd say, well, Ted Williams, the greatest hitter ever. What's your response to that?
I think he probably was. I think just pure hitter, someone who, if you needed to have, everybody always says, if I needed somebody to go to bat playing for my life or my family, and they usually, pick somebody like maybe a Mickey Mantle. I think I would pick a Ted Williams. If I needed a hit, I think I would pick Ted Williams or Tony Gwynn, just to get a hit, or maybe Pete Rose.
Okay.
I'm not saying that they were the greatest hitters. I'm just saying if I needed a hit, these were people that understood baseball and understood how to get a ball in play and produce. I mean, Ted Williams hit a home run in his last at bat. Ted Williams, as he approached 40, hit 388.
That's amazing. So you mentioned the MVP awards that Mantle won, and said there was a couple that maybe I got this wrong, but I think there was two of them that were kind of questionable. One was when Yogi won, and Yogi's statistics were, far removed from where Mantle was in that season. And then also I think another one, Brooks Robinson won. Could you just talk about those two seasons?
Well, there were seasons when, who decides on the MVPs? Baseball writers. So much of this is a popularity contest. And the best example on this is that after the 1955 season, when I think it was 55 that Yogi was the MVP, and at the beginning of that season, Mickey, there's a story that's well known of Mickey going to one of the Yankee publicists and talking to him about, look, what does somebody have to do to be considered for this? And he was given a lesson on dealing with writers, because in those seasons, 52, 53, 54, that was when Mantle's negative attitude toward the media had, just really come into play. And Mantle wasn't the very popular player that he became, especially after 56, both with fans and the media. And he was told, look, they're the ones that select this, and you need to be a better, not only team representative, but a representative of yourself in dealing with the media.
Right. It's politics.
And so that the politics involved there. I mean, it's the same way is true today, even in the Hall of Fame. I mean, Derek Jeter doesn't get in as a unanimous vote. Right. I mean, who do you blame that on? You blame that on the system that has been in place, right? Because early in the 20th century, what was the most powerful tool out there, the most powerful medium out there were newspapers, not only in politics, but in sports. And so sports writers became the place, they became the demigods of deciding who was in the Hall of Fame and who wasn't, of deciding who was well-liked and who wasn't, who was MVP and who wasn't.
Let's talk a little bit about some of the father figures for Mantle. He had his own father, Mutt, I believe his name was, and he was pretty tough on Mantle. And then he had also, I guess Casey Stengel could be considered as kind of a father figure wannabe for Mantle, but they had kind of a strained relationship, exemplified by the fact that when Stengel was asked to list his, all-time greatest team, he did not, of all players, not just Yankees, he did not include Mantle, and that was a sore point. But what were those two relationships like for Mantle, and how did it affect him? His dad, Mutt, and then Casey Stengel as his manager.
Well, being a Yankee fan, you know how Stengel is regarded. And in some ways, all of that came to be because he was there at a time when the Yankees had these incredible teams that were able to go to the World Series or, year after year. There were no playoffs at the time. You won the American League and you automatically were in the World Series. They did quite well. Was it all Casey Stengel's doing? I happen to be one of those who believes it was. If you could have had any manager, you could have had Tony Castro, Robert Manni managing the Yankees of that period, and they would have probably done pretty much the same thing.
Right.
I don't mean to demean the role of managers in baseball, but there's any number of people who will tell you that baseball managers are probably responsible for a dozen wins alone every season, or only a dozen wins. And especially nowadays when you have these situations where how often do you have a manager thrown out? I mean, it's not that often, but how often do you have a manager thrown out and the person who winds up being the acting manager in that game wins the game?
Right. Mm-hmm.
And so with Mantle and Casey Stengel wanted to have this creation attributed to him that here was this guy, because Casey took over a team that already had the greatest player of that era, Joe DiMaggio. So the DiMaggio teams, I've always felt that Stengel was tougher on DiMaggio than he was on Mantle. And he was tough on DiMaggio because he didn't like the fact that DiMaggio didn't curtsy, figuratively to him. And I think he was glad to see DiMaggio playing his last season there in 1951. And so here comes this rookie that if any manager today or any coach today in any sport were to say, what if Bill Belichick today, and here with Brady now gone and it all falling upon a new quarterback, what if he were to say about this quarterback, he will be greater than Brady, he will be greater than John Unitas, he will be the greatest quarterback to play the game, and he will make you forget about it, blah, blah, blah. Well, any manager or coach who would say something like that about any athlete, especially one replacing someone like a DiMaggio at that period, would be laughed at. And his management team would probably say, cool it. But Casey was allowed to go the entire spring training building up Mantle in a way in 1951 when he was 19 years old and a rookie. I mean, they didn't do this with Mike Trout. They still don't even do it with Mike Trout. So these tremendous expectations that were placed on Mantle that eventually caused Mantle there in the first 2 months of that season to slowly diminish his own self-confidence and led to him being demoted to the minors there in 1951. Casey was his own. That's like being a father and saying, my kid's going to be the next, the next
president or whatever.
Yeah, next president or any expectation. When I'll tell you a silly story. When I coached Little League with my kids back in their time, and they were, the oldest one was 11 and 12 when he was playing Little League and was doing quite well. There was this father of a little kid who was actually a pretty good little ball player. And one day he shows up at practice with a T-shirt, a blue T-shirt with gold on it, the UCLA colors. And it said, the future Pac-10 shortstop of the UCLA Bruins.
No pressure.
And it was no pressure. Yeah, no pressure. And the kid was small. I mean, the kid, I've seen him recently. He's an adult. He's about the size. I don't think he's as big as Pee Wee Reese ever was in his heyday. But how does a parent do this to a son? To say, he's going to be the greatest. What would society say about a parent who did this?
Right.
Well, this is how the Mantle single relationship began in 1951. And it got no better after that, because in 1952, Mantle's father, Mutt Mantle, dies.
Right.
He died early in that season. It's I think it was late May of 52 that he died. And again, Stingle tried to be there for Mantle. Mantle didn't need any of that. Mantle wouldn't change any of the things that his father taught him to do, to swing from the heels, both from the right side and the left side. And Casey tried to get that changed for years, going into the 50s.
One of them to swing down at the ball, right?
Well, not so much swing down the ball. When I say swing from the heels, I mean, in other words, to be a power hitter. Right. And there were times when Casey wanted him to cut back on that swing. Mm-hmm. And he just wasn't going to do that. And the silliness of it is that, Mantle wound up getting sent down because of his high strikeout total, which for that year in 51, during the time he was with the Yankees, was really negligible when you consider that nowadays you have players who on an annual basis strike out 150 to close to 200 times a year. And nobody says much about that.
It's Guys Radio. Your host, Robert Manni. Our very special guest, Tony Castro. His book, his third book about Mickey Mantle, is called Mantle, the Best There Ever Was. A couple of other relationships I'd like to just touch on briefly. The obvious one, Mantle and Maris, 1961. They're shooting for the home run mark held by Babe Ruth at 60. They're both on their way in August. Mantle pulls a groin, I believe, and ends up with 54. Maris hits 61. I remember as a kid, we're all pulling for Mantle, and Maris is kind of like this, I don't want to say he's a polarizing figure. We rooted for him because he's a Yankee, and he had beautiful swing and great home runs and a lot of power, but he just wasn't that charismatic, mythical character that Mickey Mantle was to us kids growing up in New Jersey. Talk to us about their relationship, because some people think it's a rivalry. From reading your book and some movies I've seen, it seems like they were like blood brothers.
I'm working on a book about Mantle and Maris right now. Actually, it's more about Maris. And you're right. I mean, I don't see it as a rivalry at all. And again, we go back to the news media, to sports writers, and sports writers at that time had to do stories, not only game stories, but stories that added to that day after day. 154 games every summer. And they had to add more to it than what the competitor had, especially in New York, where you had, at one point, I think there were close to a dozen daily newspapers in New York City. So you had this competition, who's going to have more there. And things were created, things were added to it, something might be said, and it was placed in a different kind of context than it was actually said or meant to be. But it was part of that whole gotcha kind of mentality that was there with the media at that time. So the Mantle-Maris rift wasn't what has been seen out there. I'll give you a great story on this. When Maris died, Mantle, and his burial was just a horrendously cold winter day up in North Dakota. Among the people that show up is Mickey Mantle. And he cries during the entire, and he's not drunk. Mantle told me he hadn't been drunk, hadn't been drinking, because he just didn't want to show himself up at Roger's funeral. But he was there, and he was having a difficult time controlling it. Now, Mantle's feeling on Maris was that he wished he could have been the father to his kids that Roger Maris was to his.
Right.
He wished he could have been the husband to Merlin that Roger was to his wife. That's right there. Speaks volumes for how different the two men were. You know, Maris was this consummate family man who had a difficult time being away from his family for those 4 or 5 months during the height of the baseball season. And Mantle loved that, especially since he had girlfriends in every ballpark, every major league city he went to.
How about Billy Martin? To me, Billy Martin's a polarizing figure. He was a great player. He was a running buddy with Mickey Mantle, and Mantle kind of looked up to him. And as manager of the Yankees, he got championships. I was a Reggie Jackson fan. I knew he could be kind of a polarizing character himself. I didn't like all that bickering that was on the team, but the team was so fun to watch. That version of the Yankees. Tell us about Billy Martin and Billy Martin's relationship with Mickey Mantle and how it impacted him. Was he an enabler? Was he a good influence? What do you think, Tony?
I think he was a good influence. I mean, Mantle, this is not only in my books, but other biographies of Mantle. Billy, having had more experience and being a better baseball person, knowing baseball better than Mickey did, oftentimes, Mantle made no secret that he would steal bases based not upon any signals that were given to him, not upon anything Casey Stengel might have said to him, but looking into the dugout and getting signals from Billy Martin.
Mm-hmm. Amazing.
Billy telling him, when to steal, when. Because Mantle said, a lot of times he just didn't know about these things. His dad had taught him how to hit for power, how to drive a ball. His father had never taught him the intricacies of the game, not even being a very good shortstop.
Mm-hmm. Let's go into some, if you don't mind. Let's talk about some other baseball issues because you're an expert, and I'd love for our listeners to get your perspective on a couple of things. What do you think about steroid-era players getting into the Hall of Fame? Yes or no?
I think yes. No, the reason I say I'm hesitant on it is just, when you say steroid-era players, you're thinking about people like Clemens, who I think was one of the all-time great players.
Right.
You're talking about Bonds, who probably could have been, he probably would have only had maybe 50 to 75 fewer home runs had he never touched the steroid.
Right.
That's a tragedy of these people like that. Same way with A-Rod.
Yeah.
It's just a tragedy about what happened there. And if you look, neither you or I were born yesterday, or maybe we were. I don't know. Sometimes I wonder about myself. But you can't tell me that they were the only. If we're talking about a steroid era, you can't tell me that they were the only players who were doing this. They just happened to get caught.
Yep. How about Pete Rose?
Pete Rose definitely should be in the Hall of Fame. Again, you go back to, oh God, you have a system that's in place right now where after what the Astros did last year, how do you justify not taking a World Series championship away from them? And at the same time condemning people who, like Bonds, Clemens, McGuire, Pete Rose.
Mm-hmm.
Pete.
Go ahead, Tony. I'm sorry.
No, I got to know Pete out here, not through actual baseball with Pete, but with Pete's son. I coached Pete's youngest son, Tyler Rose, along with my oldest son, Trey. And we had some great little league and travel teams together. And so I got to know Rose in ways that you never get to know a player, and that is their family and the way they handle and care for their family and their kids. And I got an entirely different view of Pete than I would have just as a follower of ball players.
Mm-hmm.
And so I have a fondness for Pete that goes beyond I was never a huge Pete Rose fan as a player, simply because, you know, he played for the Reds and in the National League, and I just didn't follow them. But I think that he should be given other types of consideration, given his accomplishments, before he bet or was caught betting, or that we had proof of his betting. Mm-hmm. You know, it's like anything else in law and order. You go after certain people for a number of different reasons, and you don't go after other players, and you allow them to skate.
Mm-hmm. Let's talk a little bit about, since we've got a couple more minutes, the Astros, the asterisk scandal. And then to me, what's interesting, I think they should just declare no champion in 2017. I think players should have been suspended, but I guess that was part of the deal. So not my, that's the commissioner's call. I'm not really crazy about this commissioner and all these new rules he wants to come up with. But the other thing, the other shoe hasn't dropped yet, where he delayed the decision on the Red Sox. We haven't heard. Okay, well, what about the Red Sox in 2018? What's your thoughts on all of this stuff, Tony?
I think the credibility of the commissioner's office, and in turn the credibility of baseball as we've known it in recent years, has dropped a great deal. I've never been real impressed with many of the commissioners. In some ways, I wish George W. Bush had become commissioner even after he became president of the United States. I mean, Bush has a much better, we may laugh at some of the silliness of the George Bush years and some of the things he said, but his smarts as a baseball man, I was once doing a book, in fact, titled The Baseball Presidency of George W. Bush. This was like it was 1999, 2000, 2001. And probably would have done this book had it not been for 9/11. Just ruined everything.
Right.
I mean, 9/11 turned George Bush from kind of a lighthearted figure into a real president. Like him or not, disagree with his policies or not, his decisions. It changed the man. And afterwards, I think he would have been a great commissioner. It couldn't be any worse than the commissioners we've had of baseball, with the exception of maybe Peter Uberhoff.
Mm-hmm. Oh, I prefer personally if he would have been baseball commissioner instead of president, but that's another story. So, what do you think's going to happen? What do you think's going to happen with the Red Sox?
I think some kind of I don't think it'll be anything close to what the Astros have gotten or should have gotten. I think it will be minor. I think the fact that the Red Sox took some action, in getting rid of the manager and taking some other steps helps out. But as what's happened with the Astros goes to show, there's no real accountability beyond that. I mean, the Astros did what they really had to do, and in many ways, I think the Astros ownership, the day after this was announced, or the day that this was announced, did more than the commissioner himself. And I mean, what's silly about this is that how can you not remove not the Astros, but declare a vacant championship there? On the one hand, how can you have one group of people, one sport do that, and another one, a college sport, take a Heisman Trophy away from Reggie Bush?
That's right.
Who did nothing to cheat on the field.
Right. Mm-hmm. Okay, last question. And then we got to wrap. Chicano Power. The reason I asked this is that's your seminal book, and it's a very important book. Tell our listeners what it's about and why it's important.
Chicano Power was a book about, today we hear a lot about Latinos, Latino voters, how Latino voters have, fueled Bernie Sanders' victory in the California primary here, how in Nevada, the Latino vote in this country has become very important in democratic politics. How important it's going to be in national politics in this coming election is up in the air, because it's not a monolithic vote. I mean, Mexican Americans in the Southwest are going to vote differently than your Cuban Americans in Florida, or your Puerto Ricans either in Puerto Rico, which all of them are American citizens. We might tell the President of the United States, or the Puerto Ricans in New York.
Right.
So there's this great giant block of voters and population, the second largest, the largest population, far outnumbering African Americans in this country. It's the largest ethnic group in America today. So Chicano is an expression that the activists gave to themselves during the 60s that has some kind of a historical significance, which is debated depending on your point of view. But that's where the title comes from, Chicano, referring to these activists at that time.
Okay. Guys Radio, our special guest has been the amazing Tony Castro. His latest book is Mantle, the Best There Ever Was. He has he has 7 other books, and I suggest you check them out. Tony, could you please tell our listeners where they can find out more about you and your books?
Well, our website is TonyCastro.com. And if you go to it, it'll link you to my Amazon book page. Or if you're just interested in the Mantle book, you can go to mickeymantle.live, and that takes you right to the Amazon page about the Mantle book, and you can order it directly from there. You can also order it TonyCastroBooks.com, which has all those books, and you can get them signed at that place, especially right now, because I know the Los Angeles Times Book Festival that we were going to have here next month has been canceled or moved back until the fall. And I would imagine other book festivals this summer and book promotions are all put aside until this coronavirus scare or coronavirus situation is over.
Okay. Well, listen, terrific job. A pleasure to meet you, and honor to have you on the show, Tony. You're a true guys guy. Tony Castro on Guys Radio. Thank you, Tony.
Thank you, Robert.
It's Guy Radio.
Okay, that was a terrific interview with Tony Castro. What a wonderful man, humble guy, prolific, terrific writer, and we learned a lot about our heroes and about people like Mickey Mantle, who, if you grew up in the 60s or 70s even, and you remember watching the Yankees, a dynasty Yankee from that version of the dynasty Yankees, he was just an amazing, mythic, bigger-than-life character, and we saw his kind of fall from grace, if you will, over the years, and he succumbed to alcoholism, and he passed away in the 90s, I believe. But Mickey Mantle, I guess the learning is really that we can enjoy our sports heroes, if you will, but the real heroes are, regular human beings, people like our family members, our own dads, hopefully, and our moms and our friends and people who just do really good things for other people. The entertainment factor of sports is fantastic, but let's not be worshiping sports figures, and let's see them and empathize with these sports figures who are on so much under the microscope of the public eye that, their frailties, their humanness becomes so open, and they become so vulnerable, and sometimes they fall victim to all of their success. So something to be learned there. Guys Radio, we're on KCAA Radio every Wednesday evening at 8 p.m. Pacific Time, 102.3, 106.5 FM, 1050 AM. The show rebroadcasts every Sunday at 2 p.m. So if you're cruising down the 5 or on the 101 or the 163 or the 8, and you want to listen to something different, something that'll hopefully help you think and feel and act, then Guys Radio is for you. I'm not saying you're going to totally vibe and take the advice of all the experts I bring on the show, but you will learn something, and then you can determine how you want to deploy that, if at all, in your life. So Guys Radio. The podcast drops worldwide every Thursday. Apple Podcasts, iTunes, Google Podcasts, Spotify, iHeartRadio, Spreaker, Stitcher, TuneIn, Blog Talk Radio, CastBox, KCA. You can stream the show, or also my website, robertmanni.com. We've got over 300 blogs there, lots of information about all things Guy, including the source material for everything Guy, my novel, The Guy's Guide to Love. You can pick it up on Amazon or wherever you buy your books, and you can get the digital format, or you can get a physical copy. It's been called the mail successor to Sex and the City. It's a rom-com about two dudes in advertising competing for love, sex, power, and money in New York City back in the year 2008. A long time ago, it seems now, with everything going on. So, Guys Radio, I'm also all over social media. You can catch me on Instagram, Facebook, Twitter, wherever you consume your social media. I know a lot of people are kind of homebound these days, so it's a perfect time to check out your favorite podcasts, to read a book, to really reassess things, and when we get back out there, to savor every moment of our lives and learn from every minute and create the lives we want every step of the way. So Guys Radio, thanks so much for being with me. I really appreciate all my listeners and all my guests. If you want to support the show, please rate us, review us, and subscribe on iTunes/Apple Podcasts, Guys Radio. So we'll be back again next week with a new show. Thank you so much. And as I always like to say, guys, finish first.